If you've been running program increment planning events, spending tens or even hundreds of thousands of pounds on this 2 or 3 day event with over 100 person days, but you're not getting results, then you've come to the right place. Hi friends, I'm Ahmed, a scaled agile and productivity coach based in the UK. On this channel, we explore productivity, agility, and joy in the workplace. In this video, we're going to go over the 5 top reasons why you may be wasting tens or even hundreds of thousands of pounds on PI planning. If you wait till the end, there will be a bonus and secret tip, number 6, which is rare, but when it occurs, it can completely devastate your PI planning event. So let's get started. You remember the PI planning event, right? It's that event which takes place every 8 to 12 weeks for the full Agile release train, which consists of between 50 and 125 people across between 5 and 12 teams. It's that planning event that helps the entire Agile release train determine at a high level, at a roadmap level, what the focus should be for the next 8 to 12 weeks. But now here's the problem. We typically, before the COVID situation, we had all of these individuals coming into a single room because remote dialing was very much discouraged, which made sense if you think about it, because the whole point, or at least one of the points of this event, was to have built a sense of collaboration and camaraderie, which is really still quite hard to do online. Now, these in-person events would probably take 2 days, but now with remote planning, they can frequently take 3 days because obviously the attention span isn't that long. And what I'm seeing is that these events are now spanning over up to 3 days. So there's a significant investment in these events, and it's not just in terms of the number of pounds, but also in terms of the amount of time that we invest across the entire Agile release train and solution train. Now, after all this sacrifice, the last thing we want, if we want to walk out of this 2 or 3 day event with a plan that doesn't hang together, that has got significant issues. So let's have a look at the 5 top anti-patterns for PI planning that you need to be aware of. Okay, so let's get started by looking at what is an anti-pattern. So let's have a look at how the Agile Alliance defines what an anti-pattern actually is. So anti-patterns are common solutions to common problems where the solution is ineffective and may result in undesired consequences. And they go on to differentiate the difference between a bad practice and an anti-pattern, where an anti-pattern is common practice. It looks like it's an appropriate solution, but it ends up having consequences that far outweigh the benefits, kind of like a drug that you take where the side effects are worse than the actual disease itself. An anti-pattern is also different from bad practice when there is a better solution that's been proven and has worked repeatedly and is also proven to be effective. So let's have a look at each of these anti-patterns for planning. And I ask you, as we go through these, ask yourself whether you have fallen foul to any of these. I'll also call out the solution to each of these as we go through them as well. So the first challenge we have is around preparation, what I would call inappropriate preparation. Now, preparation spans your requirements that you bring in. So those are your features. There could also be clarity in terms of your goals, which we'll be touching on in a little while as well. Your architectural runway, making sure that you're clear on the architecture, requirements for your upcoming plan, and also on your team structure. So you want to be clear on all of these areas before we walk into PI planning. Now, we want to make sure we don't have too little preparation, but we also want to make sure we don't go overboard as well. Sometimes I'm actually seeing some teams are almost planning prior to PI planning. The point of PI planning is that we all come together, we identify, we collaborate, we work on the plan together, identify and surface those dependencies, and then we work through that. So that's one of the things, you need to get the preparations just right, and that's one of the challenges that we have. Let's move on to the next one. This is a big one that I see quite frequently, even with teams that have been working and been doing a number of PI plannings, and this is where you have poor capacity management. And this stems from a number of reasons. One is not having an appropriate sizing approach across the train that everybody's agreed upon. Teams need to be clear upon what they're able to perform in the past. They take yesterday's weather, they take the performance that they did in the last PI. If they don't, they do an estimate, an educated estimate based upon the effort that they have and the amount of time that they have and the taking holidays and other things into consideration. And then they use that to extrapolate what they think that they can do in this PI. We don't want to just make up stuff as we go along. We want to use our past performance as an indicator of what we can do going forward as well. So capacity management is very important at the team level, but it's also very important at the program tier as well. So as an Agile release train, what were we able to do in the last program increment, and making sure that we don't start to kid ourselves. If we load ourselves with too much work, then the chances of us either not fulfilling our goals is quite high, or worse, we end up reducing our quality and fall down into this waterfall kind of trap, poor quality coming out as a result of overloading our Agile release train. Okay, so let's move on to now problem number 3. So the third problem you have is your requirements or your features, which are the primary construct that we use to take in our requirements into the Agile release train. They're not split for value. They're not value oriented. So what do I mean by that? So for example, let me just give you a quick example. Let's just say we have a feature or requirement for customer registration. So the customer registration feature has, for example, let's just say it has details, the customer details, the personal details as part of that. It also has account information and details. It also has, let's just say, a credit check in there just to make things interesting. And also, let's just say it has some payment details it needs to add in there. Okay, so fairly run-of-the-mill, fairly straightforward. Now, if we split this up based upon what could be a typical way of doing it, or an easy way, I would actually say, of doing it, we just say, okay, let's just do customer registration details, the billing, the credit check, and we can do each of these separately. But actually, if you think about it, none of these actually release real value. Rather, what we want to do is we want to put, as Mike Cohn actually says, is a tracer bullet through the system. Okay, and so that means is that an example of that would be, for example, you may have a specific type of customer, right? Maybe they're cash only customer, or maybe they're only buying certain types of products, okay? Or maybe they don't require a credit check, right? Etc., etc. Now, those examples are examples that span the entire customer journey from the beginning to the end for a specific type of customer or specific kind of customer that's buying a specific product. Now, that is splitting for value. You can actually release that into the market and you can actually start to gain the benefits of that going forward. This is one of the big problems when what we find is that when we don't orient ourselves towards value, we can very, very frequently spend a number of program increments and not actually be releasing value into the market, which is one of the fundamental advantages of using an Agile approach. Okay, let's move on now. The next one is around a lack of clear goals, right? Or goal clarity, as I put it over here, right? So when we walk into our PI planning, we want to be clear on our overall roadmap. We want to be clear on the high level goals. Now, of course, it's possible that as we go through the planning, we may not be able to achieve or commit to all of those goals. That is understood, and that will be driven by what the teams feel that they are able to commit to. Nevertheless, everything that comes out from the teams needs to be clearly articulated in terms of these goals, needs to map onto what these goals are, or the roadmap needs to be adjusted accordingly. But also, what I'm also seeing quite frequently is that many times when we come out from a PI planning, what your goals are written technology-centric language rather than business-oriented language. And having your goal written in a way in which is understandable to somebody, to your customer or to your end user, or to your business is a very important element that shouldn't be forgotten about. Okay, let's move on to problem number 5. Problem number 5 has to do with fully loaded plans. So let's have a look at what do I mean by that. So if you imagine your program increment, that's your duration. And if you imagine these lines that I'm putting there is your 2-week iterations or your sprint cycles, then what we want to do is at the beginning of our program increment, we want to be loading up our sprints to a higher percentage, whatever that is. Let's just say, for argument's sake, for example, we say we want to load up the first sprint up to 80%. Then the next one, we want to drop these down to, say, 70%. I'm just making these numbers up, by the way. You'll determine what works best for you. And as you go along, you just drop down the percentage of load that of your capacity that you actually use. And so the reason for that is for 2 reasons. First of all, the further away we go in the plan, the more chances there are of deviation, of changes need to come in, of basically the world events happening. And we need to be able to be responsive, and we need to keep enough flex in our plan so that they don't end up into a fully committed lockdown waterfall plan. So what we have over here is we want to make sure we give enough agility over there in terms of how we are actually doing it. And again, this is where the goals come in very important, because what happens is that there may be different ways in us achieving those goals. And we want to bear in mind that as we go forward, we don't want to be planning too rigidly, too far in the future, because basically that will reduce our overall agility. So fully loaded plans is a big problem that I'm seeing quite frequently, and we need to be aware that we don't fully load our plans when we're doing our team planning as well. Now, onto the 6th problem that I alluded to in the beginning of the video, and that is to do with where we've got our Agile release train is dependent upon external factors. For example, infrastructure. For example, the network that you might have over there. You may be dependent on other teams. They could be for when you are creating a consumable solution. There may be external teams such as the marketing team that may not be on your Agile release train for whatever reason. You may have other issues with the overall integration with the release cycles, with the overall organization that you might have. You may have other dependencies that are outside of your control. And these are foundational elements that you need to have a think about prior to coming into PI planning. Now remember, all of your external dependencies may not be working in Agile. This is the real world after all. Many of them may be working in a waterfall manner. And so we've got to make sure that we have that kind of conversation with them to ensure that we have given them enough time to be able to respond to our requirements, and also to have that dialogue and to see where we need to adjust versus where we're putting in requests to them for them to be able to fulfill so that we can achieve our program goals. So there you have it, friends. 6 things that we want to watch out for, okay? If you would like to learn more how to measure value in a scaled Agile environment, then please click over here. If you want to find out what the 5 top tips for effective PI planning is, then please click over here. Hope you found that useful, and see you in the next video. Thanks very much. Goodbye.